I can't lie to you, Sheriff. You're too good a man. Look over your left shoulder.
Do you remember the era when Smokey and the Bandit drove the entire country absolutely wild? The roaring of the engines, the endless open highways, and a daredevil who took on the mission to transport 400 cases of Coors beer across America in less than 28 hours. But behind that legendary chase was a film set that was even crazier car jumps that nearly resulted in disaster, real police officers showing up right during filming, and a star who tore the script to pieces with improvisations that no one could possibly control. Here are the 15 most bizarre behind-the-scenes facts about Smokey and the Bandit, 1977. 15. The movie stemmed from a real-life beer smuggling operation. It is hard to believe, but the entirety of Smokey and the Bandit was actually born just because of a few bottles of beer. In the 1970s, Coors beer was practically considered a contraband commodity in many states across the eastern United States. It was not legally distributed, spoiled quite quickly, and was so extraordinarily rare that a large number of people were perfectly willing to drive their vehicles for hundreds of miles just to purchase a few cases to bring back home. During the production of the movie, Gator director Hal Needham discovered that several members of the film crew were secretly stealing those precious bottles of Coors from his personal refrigerator. Instead of becoming angry, he suddenly had an absolutely wild and crazy idea. If people risk their lives just to get a few bottles of beer, then what will happen if they have to transport all 400 crates? That idea rapidly developed into Smokey and the Bandit. And the mission of Bandit and Snowman in the movie, smuggling 400 cases of Coors across 1,200 miles within the span of 28 hours, was actually constructed from the very real-life Coors craze. 14. Burt Reynolds' friends begged him not to take the movie. Before Smokey and the Bandit became a phenomenon, almost no one believed that this movie would be successful. Few people know this, but many of Burt Reynolds' closest friends sought him out and desperately pleaded with him to back out of the project. The reason for this was exceedingly simple. Reynolds at that point in time was one of the absolute biggest stars in Hollywood. And as for the director Hal Needham, he was nothing more than a stuntman who had never directed a single motion picture, and he had even been living in Reynolds' house for well over a decade. To a great number of people, this felt significantly more like professional career suicide than an actual movie. An A-list superstar wagering his entire professional reputation on a completely inexperienced director. A screenplay centered around smuggling beer and a handful of muscle cars. That sounds exactly like the absolute perfect recipe for creating a catastrophic disaster. Nevertheless, Burt Reynolds still firmly decided to go ahead and place his bet anyway. And that particular gamble would ultimately bring about the single most successful motion picture of his entire professional career. 13. Marlon Brando's deep-seated hatred for Burt Reynolds. Hollywood has previously witnessed a very large number of famous feuds, but very few relationships were quite as intensely strained as the one between Marlon Brando and Burt Reynolds. The entire situation completely exploded when Paramount actively considered handing the role of Michael Corleone in The Godfather over to Reynolds. Immediately upon hearing that news, Brando became absolutely furious. He is said to have threatened to walk away from the project and declared that he did not want to appear on the same screen with Reynolds. As for Burt Reynolds, he certainly did not back down or yield in the slightest. When Smokey and the Bandit became a massive box office phenomenon in the year 1977, Reynolds immediately retaliated with public sarcastic remarks directed specifically at Brando. From that point onward, the underlying feud between two of Hollywood's absolute biggest stars grew increasingly bitter and resentful. The irony is that Reynolds later admitted that turning down the role in The Godfather was the biggest mistake of his life, a decision that caused him to lose the opportunity to step into the greatest motion picture in the history of cinema, and perhaps also caused the rivalry with Marlon Brando to never come to a close. 12. A crew member's bizarre obsession with the cast. Stalking an actor. That is a textbook way to get kicked off a movie set. That was the exact fate of one crew member who became hopelessly obsessed with Jackie Gleason, the comedy genius playing Sheriff Buford T. Justice. The man acted like a textbook stalker, shadowing Gleason around the set and frantically scribbling the actor's gestures and lines into a tiny notebook. The madness peaked when the man approached Gleason, shoved a handwritten list into his hands, and demanded that the veteran actor perform the scene according to his directions. Thoroughly amused and annoyed, Gleason delivered a cold reality check, Kid, I was ad-libbing before you were breathing. Within minutes, the obsessed crew member was escorted off the premises and promptly fired. 11. Real cops almost arrested the entire crew. Remember the high-octane chase where Bandit and Frog are relentlessly pursued by dozens of police cars pulling off hair-raising maneuvers and smashing through roadblocks? As it turns out, while filming those chaotic pursuits, the crew found themselves in a bizarre real-life predicament. They almost got thrown in jail by actual police officers, craving ultimate realism. Director Hal Needham had the cars tearing down the road at breakneck speeds and staging real crashes, but he completely forgot to close off the highway or put up warning signs. Local law enforcement immediately swarmed the scene. Amidst the chaos, the crew scrambled frantically to dig up their filming permits, while desperately trying to explain the situation to the furious officers. According to some crew accounts, the police were so enraged by the public hazard that they nearly handcuffed several crew members on the spot for disorderly conduct. 10. The most dangerous landing in the movie. Now let's talk about one of the film's most breathless moments. Bandit floors the Pontiac Trans Am with Frog in the passenger seat, trying to evade a police dragnet. Suddenly, a wild obstacle appears, a massive gap on the partially demolished Mulberry Bridge. This went down as one of the most death-defying stunts in cinematic history. Keep in mind, back in 1977, there was no CGI safety net. The car had to soar over 70 feet through the air. Making matters worse, the landing zone was an uneven dirt embankment, where a bad angle could cause a catastrophic flip at any second. Because the stunt was so incredibly risky, director Hal Needham stepped up to drive the car himself. Meanwhile, stuntwoman Leda St. Edmund doubled as Frog, bravely strapping into the passenger seat. The result, the Trans Am was completely totaled upon impact, but miraculously both Needham and St. Edmund walked away without a scratch. 9. Sally Field took the role because she was labeled ugly? Who could forget the charming Carrie, affectionately nicknamed Frog? The moniker stuck because of her quirky habit of crouching down and hopping around like a hyperactive frog. Ironically, the reason Sally Field agreed to play the character stemmed from a deep professional wound Hollywood had pigeonholed her as an unattractive actress, though she had just won an Emmy for her powerful portrayal of a deeply troubled woman, Sybil. 1976, the grueling, gaunt look she sported for the role backfired. It led audiences and executives alike to assume she was plain-looking. So when Burt Reynolds personally asked her to join the film, Field took a massive gamble. She accepted the part, hoping that if the world saw her being pursued by the most handsome superstar in Hollywood, they would finally change their minds about her looks. And as we all know, her gamble paid off. Nobody looked at Frog and saw someone plain. Instead, the world fell in love with her infectious charm. 8. The hilarious secret behind Sheriff Buford T. Justice. Few realize that the notorious hot-tempered Sheriff Buford T. Justice was actually based on a real person, a real-life Florida Highway Patrol officer. Just like his on-screen counterpart, the real Buford was incredibly arrogant and constantly made life miserable for the employees of Burt Reynolds Sr., who just happened to be Burt Reynolds' father and the police chief of Riviera Beach. To get a little sweet revenge, Burt Reynolds grabbed the officer's actual name and slapped it onto the most hated character in the movie. On top of that, Burt completely transformed him into a bloated, bumbling fool to be laughed at by millions of moviegoers. I don't know how that Florida State Trooper felt when he saw the movie, but if it were me, I probably would have died of pure embarrassment. 7. Fred the dog was discovered in a lazy dog contest. Another four-legged character completely stole the spotlight in the film Fred the Basset Hound. With his stubby legs, sleepy eyes, and agonizingly slow demeanor, Fred accidentally created some of the absolute funniest moments in the movie. To find the perfect hound, the crew went all out, organizing a contest in Atlanta called The Ugliest and Laziest Dog in the Southeast. Out of more than 400 contestants, Burt Reynolds personally handpicked a dog named Happy because he was incredibly lazy and refused to listen to anyone. Since he was completely untrainable, the crew had to resort to hiding sausages and hot dogs inside Jerry Reed's pockets. As a result, every single tail wag or affectionate look Fred gives on screen was actually just Happy being starving and begging for food. After the movie premiered, Fred became a massive fan favorite. He was so incredibly successful that he became one of the most famous dogs of the 1970s. Pontiac even received thousands of fan letters asking if there was a version of the Trans Am that came with a complimentary Basset Hound. 6. Burt Reynolds took the role. All because of an accidental joke on TV. Who would have guessed that one of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters was born out of a casual joke on late-night television? The entire massive project was triggered when superstar Burt Reynolds casually joked on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, that his roommate Hal Needham had just written a brilliant script about beer smuggling truckers. The hilarious truth at the time, Hal Needham's script was actually sitting in a corner, and Burt had previously trashed it as the worst script he had ever read. However, Burt Reynolds' star power at the time was simply massive. The very next morning, a wave of top Hollywood studios frantically reached out, sparking an unprecedented bidding war for the rights. The result, Universal Pictures snagged the rights, instantly turning a veteran stuntman into a million-dollar director. 5. That cop car crash was completely unscripted. If you're like me, you probably thought the cops in this movie were portrayed as inexplicably stupid. The peak of this clumsiness is the sequence where a patrol car in the middle of a frantic high-speed chase suddenly loses control, veers off the road, and nosedives straight into a deep ditch. But that wasn't the original plan at all. According to the script, the 1975 Pontiac Le Mans was supposed to launch over the embankment, soar through the air, and stick a clean four-wheel landing. Instead, when the cameras started rolling, the stunt driver hit the gas way too hard. The car launched into the air like a high diver and planted its front bumper straight into the thick mud. The entire set froze in absolute terror. But the moment director Hal Needham realized the stunt driver was completely fine, he started jumping up and down with pure excitement. He realized this accidental wreck delivered a visual that was far more authentic and hilarious than anything they could have planned, and he kept the priceless footage in the final cut. 4. The original script was laughably short. If you think the movie's hilarious dialogue was the product of a genius writer's room, you've been fooled. In reality, the initial script was incredibly bare bones. Because of this, Burt Reynolds and Jackie Gleason had to constantly ad-lib. It is estimated that roughly 75% of Sheriff Buford T. Justice's iconic lines were dreamed up by Gleason right on the spot. Remember that tense, brilliant encounter at the roadside diner? Sheriff Buford sits at the counter, enjoying a meal and rambling on to the bandit, completely oblivious to the fact that the very man he is frantically hunting is sitting right next to him. That entire back and forth was born out of pure spontaneous improvisation, with the two actors bouncing off each other perfectly to create one of the funniest scenes in cinema history. 3. A bitter twist from the GM president. In 1977, Smokey and the Bandit absolutely crushed the box office. The momentum from the film triggered an unprecedented commercial frenzy, causing Pontiac Trans Am sales to skyrocket by 700%. Thrilled by this spectacular milestone, the general manager of Pontiac at the time, Alex Mayer, immediately called superstar Burt Reynolds. He made a rock-solid promise he would personally gift the actor a brand new Trans Am every single year for the rest of his life. For the first 5 years, the promise was executed flawlessly. A shiny new car arrived like clockwork. But by the 6th year, Reynolds waited and waited, but the new ride never showed up. Fearing the shipment might have been lost somewhere, he took the initiative and called GM's executive office to check in. When Reynolds asked about the "for the rest of his life" clause, the new president nonchalantly delivered the punchline: "It was for the rest of his life, but it was for the life of the man who promised it, not yours. He passed away." 2. A budget cut right at the finish line. Right before the cameras were set to roll, Universal Pictures abruptly sent executives to slash $1 million, right out of the original $5.3 million budget. After subtracting Burt Reynolds' massive $1 million paycheck, Hal Needham was left scrambling to pull off the entire movie with a mere $3.3 million. Why the sudden backward move? The reality was that Universal cut the budget simply because they had zero faith in the film. The studio chairman, Lew Wasserman, had only greenlit the project as a personal favor due to his great relationship with Burt Reynolds. Desperate, Hal Needham reached out to Pontiac to beg for a sponsorship. Against all odds, Pontiac agreed, immediately supplying 4 1977 Trans Ams that hadn't even been released to the public yet. That desperation move triggered a historic boom. More than 25,000 Trans Ams were ordered immediately after the movie swept through theaters. 1. The brutal destruction of the cars. Initially, Pontiac didn't really buy into the project, so they only sent 4 beat-up Trans Ams to the set. However, the actual stunts turned out to be so punishing that the cars suffered snapped suspensions, blown engines, and completely obliterated chassis. By the final week of shooting, only a single Trans Am was left functional. To make matters worse, its transmission was so severely damaged that it couldn't shift into reverse. Every time they needed to start a take, the entire crew had to take turns manually pushing the car to get it rolling. The hilarious story didn't end there. As soon as filming wrapped, Pontiac immediately took back all the vehicles and put them straight into a compactor to be crushed into scrap metal. The Trans Ams had been ravaged beyond recognition. They were so badly warped that absolutely no one could ever drive them again. And those are the 15 wild, hilarious, and thrilling behind-the-scenes facts of Smokey and the Bandit 1977. From a rough, discarded script, it didn't just conquer the box office of its era, it became an immortal icon in the hearts of fans. Which of these 15 secrets surprised you the most? Was it the death-defying leap by a fearless director, the adorable stubbornness of Fred the dog, or the spectacular twist that turned the Pontiac Trans Am into a historic bestseller? Drop a comment right below to join the discussion. Don't forget to like, share this post, and follow the channel today.